Welcome to Vendetta Sports Media. It's the Daily Show, and it is August 15th. And today we have myself and Matt Hannafan. Matt, how's it going?
Doing all right, man. Doing all right. How about yourself?
I would have said I was doing all right, but I stumbled doing the introduction, so I'm behind the eight ball already. I
It's
forgot
okay.
what the
I,
date
I
was.
messed it up before too, so it's all good. But
We have actually got quite a bit of news today because, or at least important news. There's always news, but we've got quite a bit of news because yesterday we had a lot of action in the sports world, and I think the lead thing is probably the NFL running backs. We've got two running backs who found homes. So let's start with that. And the first of the two, we'll start with Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook going to the Jets on 1 year, 8 million. I guess to start, are you surprised that the Jets ended up being the destination here? Because the Dolphins were always the kind of thought of where he was going to go, and ultimately that's not what happened.
I'm surprised from the perspective of I did think it was going to be the Dolphins, but once the rumors were coming out that yeah, he was visiting the Jets, he was visiting with other teams, yeah, he's doing his due diligence. Obviously, you don't want to pinpoint your free agent. Like if you're in free agency, you don't want to pinpoint it to one team. You want to do your due diligence, but it felt like there was more and more smoke like once that happened, even though there were stuff that came out after that. The Jets staff thought it was like a weird type of a visit, which I don't know what that means. Because I've never been on a visit before as an NFL free agent, so I don't know what weird versus not weird would be like. But the thing I was most surprised about was the number. Do we know the official guarantees? I don't think I saw.
I can try and find it real quick.
Fully guaranteed.
I know that Zeke's guarantee was out, and his had quite a bit of incentives, but I didn't. I can try and
Okay.
find Dalvin Cook's guarantee.
Okay, because it's like I was surprised at the number because it's like once Zeke signed for I think it was 1 year 6 million. I mean I thought Dalvin was probably going to get around that number. I didn't expect it to be nearly 9. Even though Dalvin is younger, I think he has more juice left in his tank than Zeke does. But I mean, happy for Dalvin. I mean, obviously as a Viking fan myself, I mean it was a fun time with Dalvin. Dalvin was an exceptional player. He has 1,100 yards over the last, I think, 4 or 5 seasons. Um, and so I'm happy for him to get his money. Him teaming up with A-Rod, though, that's a little bit a conflict of interest in my brain. But in terms of just like getting the money as a running back, I've been someone who has been like anti-paying the running back. But when a player gets their money, I'm not gonna sit here and bombard them and bash them for it. So happy Dalvin got his money. I think it is interesting though because Brees Hall is coming off the ACL injury. Does that give him more time? Like, is he gonna? It kind of alleviates his return? Like he's not having to come back week 1 and expect to produce right away. I mean, it does push Michael Carter and Zonovan Knight down the depth chart a little bit, which I don't think Michael Carter was necessarily that great last year anyways, but it helps take the burden off Brees Hall and it kind of helps him operate as like a 2-backs team. I mean, we've seen this more and more over the last several years of teams just reverting to 2 running backs and splitting the load. Maybe not a 50-50 share, but like a 60-40, 70-30, 65-35. And so it helps him in that aspect. I still do think that Brees will probably get the majority of carries once he is healthy and once he is established in there after he comes back from his injury, but it helps him come back and not like the pressure's not solely on him to produce. And it gives Aaron Rodgers like a guy who you could throw screens to, a guy who still has some explosiveness. Like I've been on this show, I've been a little bit critical of Dalvin Cook and like I think he has lost some juice and some explosiveness in between the tackles, but he still is an explosive back when he gets out in space. And he
Yeah.
still is a productive running back, at least a lot more productive than the majority of running backs, or I guess the majority of second string running backs, whatever you want to label him as, throughout the league. Like I still think he still does have plenty of juice left in his tank.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think he'll help in that aspect. I mean, the offensive line is a concern. Dalvin Cook has played behind bad offensive lines in Minnesota, so that's not really super different. But I mean, I don't hate this fit for Dalvin. Again, he gets to play with Breece Hall. Like Breece Hall was really good last season up until his injury. So once he gets reacclimated into that system, and reacclimated on the field, and hopefully he's able to do that at some point within the first few weeks of the season. I think it could be a fairly good running back duo in the Big Apple.
Yeah. I agree with a lot of what you said, and I tried finding the contract details. A couple articles didn't list the breakdown, the guarantee, non-guarantee aspects of it. But Spotrac had it at 1 year, 7 million.
Okay,
And they didn't
well,
have,
that's probably the number then.
yeah, they didn't have the specific guarantees, but I imagine that's the guaranteed number if that's what they had listed, which not bad money at all. 7 million a year for this stage of the free agency market. It's like there's not a lot of money out there at this point in time, so that's a relatively good deal. And to your point about not paying running backs, I'm with you, but I think you can make exceptions on 1 year deals.
Yeah.
The thing that scares me the most about paying a running back is your Zeke Elliott, who we'll talk to in a little bit, or talk about in a little bit. When you give him that big money and you still have several years left and you're seeing the decline. Worst case scenario, you burn 7 million, 8 million, whatever the guarantee is this season. And as long as that doesn't carry on in the future, you're not biting yourself too hard if it doesn't work out. And like you said, I'm really interested to see how they divvy up these carries, because Breece Hall is going to have to get his carries. He's too good of a player not to. He had a great rookie year. And I imagine there was some sort of conversation as well. I imagine that Dalvin Cook understands that, hey, Breece Hall has to get his carries. Once he's fully healthy, he's got to get touches. And when I look at what they're going to do with Dalvin Cook, I almost imagine that they're going to use him more like they use Aaron Jones over in Green Bay, where he's, like you said, going to get a lot of screens. They're going to look to get him out in open space and
swing passes.
Yep, swing passes, stuff like that. And Breece Hall will probably do more work inside the tackles, I imagine. And that'll really help both guys, because it'll help Dalvin Cook more, obviously, because you don't get beat up as much on screens and swing passes as you do going in between the tackles. But for Breece Hall, like you said, the pressure of week one, I don't have to be 100%. Week one, I don't have to be my best self. Obviously, you'd like that. You'd prefer that. He'd prefer that. But you can take your time to recover and make sure you get back to 100% as you wait, or as Dalvin Cook leads the backfield. So this is, an interesting backfield. It's going to be very interesting, especially from a fantasy perspective. And I imagine it's going to give a lot of fantasy owners pretty big fits. Trey wrote an article last night. I read it, and his basic, summary was, good luck trying to figure this out. How can we be too sure about who gets the carries, who's going to get the touchdowns? So there's going to be a lot of question marks, especially towards the end of the year, of who's the lead back. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because you can work a committee out. And as long as both guys are getting touches, it'll work out in the end of the day. And like you said, the offensive line isn't good, and I'd be more concerned about the offensive line rather than who's going to get touches. Cook.
Yeah, I mean that's the question mark. That's the swing factor in this. And it's like, I think by the end of the season, I'm guessing Dalvin will probably have more touches, just because he probably plays longer because of the recovery process for Breece Hall. But I think when they're both healthy, I still think Breece gets the majority of those touches. But regardless, I think it's close to like a 50-50, 55-45. Like, I think they're both going to play important roles, should both of them be healthy. I hope, obviously, both of them are healthy, but like Dalvin also has an injury history as well. And so that's not something to completely ignore. I mean, it's hard. Like football is a sport where, I've said this before on the show, but like everyone's injury prone because of how violent the sport is. I mean, maybe with the exception of like the kicker or like the punter or someone like that. But like for the most part, everyone's injury prone to some extent. And so like, I hope both of them are healthy, but I think by the end, uh, I think it's going to be pretty close. Maybe there's a 60-40 in there, or whatever. I don't think that matters a whole lot in terms of like, I mean, obviously, if you're drafting Brees Hall, he's probably not. Wouldn't think he's like a first round running back anyways in terms of like a fantasy perspective, just because of the injury that he's coming off of. Maybe he is like a second round or a third round. Same with Dalvin, but the offensive line is like the huge swing factor in all this. I just don't know how that's gonna lend itself. I mean, again, if I'm just looking at history here, I mean, Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon are two very productive running backs, and they were their most productive when, I mean, Green Bay had a great offensive line, and so they were behind very good offensive lines. So if we're talking the same Nathaniel Hackett, Aaron Rodgers system, and from Green Bay, if you're copying and pasting that in New York, well, the Jets have a significantly below average offensive line, so I don't know how that's going to lend itself over a 17-game season.
Yep.
I just that's like the biggest like swing factor for me, if I'm being completely honest. Like I don't know how it's going to play out. I don't think it's going to be as smooth as it was in Green Bay, obviously, for Aaron Rodgers and Nathaniel Hackett, but who knows? I mean, again, Dalvin's played behind below average offensive lines before, so this isn't incredibly new for him, but it's just something to keep an eye on.
Yep. And the offensive line for the Jets was going to be something that's discussed all offseason after they added Aaron Rodgers, right? Once you have an older quarterback back there who's not particularly mobile, this isn't, Jalen Hurts we're talking about, but obviously Eagles have a great offensive line. That's not what I'm saying, but Aaron Rodgers, not highly mobile. And, anymore. And you have to keep him upright, and now there's going to be even more pressure on that. And to your point about Devin Cook as well, splitting carries at this point in his career, he's probably fine with. Get 2 or 3 extra years at the end of this, or however many extra years, probably be helpful in the long term, anyways. Also, one thing I forgot to mention earlier: Brees Hall did come off the PUP list this morning. Yeah. So sounds like his injury concerns or recovery, however you want to phrase it, sounds like those are going over well. So the real interesting thing here is which one of Zonovan Knight or Michael Carter gets dropped and which team do they go to, because that may end up, being a consequential move here that helps another team somewhere that could use an extra running back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember how good Knight was last year. I know Carter wasn't very good.
No, Knight was good while Brees Hall was out. It wasn't anything spectacular, but okay. I remember him being a guy that you wanted to add in fantasy. He was getting some production on the ground. Nothing special. That's usually how I remember if players were good or not. I want him in fantasy, to be honest with you. So yeah, he had a fine year, good enough to where someone would want to add him if he was dropped. So it could be an interesting wrinkle in all of this.
Could also be a practice squad guy too.
Yeah, that's true. He's still young. And then switching it over to Ezekiel Elliott, he signed with the Patriots. It was 1 year, $6 million. Not a lot of that was guaranteed. He had some incentives. So he's on a relatively cheap deal going to New England. So it's going to be him and Ramondre Stevenson in the backfield. What are your thoughts on Zeke heading over to New England?
I mean, I like it for both sides, really. I mean, I know the Patriots running back depth behind Stevenson is like Pierre Strong and Kevin Harris. And it's like I think Kevin Harris had like very, very, very brief moments last year. That's just kind of like this big bowling ball. But like, other than that, it was a thin running back room. And we've known how Belichick works historically when it comes to his running backs. He likes to rotate them in and out. And that it made it easier when you had like James White back there. Now, I mean, Zeke is he's a good pass blocker. He's good in short yardage situations. I expect him to be used as much as like Damian Harris was last year. And so I still think Ramondre gets the majority of the touches. The thing that is interesting to me is because New England's schedule is brutal this year. They probably have the toughest schedule in the entire league. And so how is Zeke going to play a factor in the passing game? Or like how is that going to take away? Because I think there's going to be a lot of situations this year where New England's trying to play behind in games. And Obviously, it helps when you have Bill O'Brien instead of Matt Patricia calling plays. And so I'm just interested to see how that shapes itself. I mean, that's a different conversation, but I still think it plays to an importance. Like, how is New England, again, while they have a better offensive coordinator, a significantly better offensive coordinator, they have a pretty good offensive line. I'd probably say it's a top in the top half of the league. Obviously with an aging Trent Brown and David Andrews, but I still think it's a solid offensive line. Um, and like how are they going to be able to score? Like what does that look like? Are they going to be throwing the ball a lot more on early downs? Like I'm trying to navigate the Patriots season, but I just in terms of like how the running back room looks, I think it's an upgrade. Obviously, again Zeke, it's not prime Zeke. Zeke is past his prime. I don't think that's really a question at this point, but um, I'm just interested to see how it shapes out, like how his snap share works out when they're down by 2 touchdowns, or they're down like however many points. I mean, obviously we won't know until the season starts, but again, I just think for the fit for Zeke, like in terms of like what's my role going to be here, I like the fit.
Yeah, and shout out third down running backs. Shout out to them. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Where it's like, the Patriots are a hard team to project, in my opinion, just because they always have been. Whether it be how many wins are they going to get, especially in the post Tom Brady era, or who's going to get the touches out of the backfield, what's the offense going to look like? It's really been a mix of a lot of different things, a lot of different names in the backfield, some decisions that you may not understand. It's like the Patriots are a very hard team to pin down. But to your point about like how they're going to run the offense, I think Zeke could be helpful in slowing down the game a little bit, and
Yeah,
um, especially, yeah, Jeremiah, 7 Patriots wins is about.
their over unders at 7.5. I think the unders at -1. At least for my book, it's like -135, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to bet this because of their schedule. I don't know. I lean towards the under though, so I think Germani's right with the 7.
Yeah. 7.5 is, by the way, great line. They knew what they were doing with that one.
Yeah.
It's because it's either going to be 7 or 8. Let's be honest.
Well, if you look at the quarterbacks they beat last year, it was like Zach Wilson twice. Like it's all these young quarterbacks, young rookie quarterbacks, and it's like this year they went from. I mean, they had I think a fairly tough schedule last year, but now they probably have the toughest in the league, and they go from like that to like I think they play like Jalen Hurts week 1, and like they have this just brutal schedule, and it's just like I don't know how this is going to play out. I do like their defense though, so maybe that keeps them in games.
Yep. And like now, especially, instead of playing Zach Wilson twice, you get Aaron Rodgers twice.
Yeah,
It's like
right.
there's some problems for New England, and that whole division got better too. Dolphins are going to be a lot better, and I have no clue how many wins Patriots are going to end up in, but they're probably going to be last in that division if it's
Yeah.
not looking great for them. But as far as Zeke goes, it's like I think this is a perfect spot for him, because I think the thing with Zeke, at least the thing that I've always said for Zeke in terms of his free agency is where can he go to use him as a short yardage guy, and he doesn't have to be your lead back. He doesn't have to be your number one guy. I think this is a pretty good spot for that. You have Ramondre Stevenson, who had a really, really good year last year. And it's like Ramondre Stevenson, he's your lead back. Zeke is your number 2, and he's going to take some carries off the lead back, which is fine because you'd rather have Zeke doing it than the other guys that were in the backfield who are frankly not very good. Honestly, they could use to add another running back. Like, I would not hate for the Patriots to go out there and add another, obviously not someone, Leonard Fournette's a free agent, not a Leonard Fournette, but like, at least a higher quality, backup reserve type guy, something better than what they have in their 3 and 4 slots now, but they were in the 2 and 3 before. So I really can't complain with them adding Zeke, and they'll probably use him correctly. And I think it'll probably end up being a good move for both sides. I was concerned that Zeke was going to get put in a bad situation, but I think he's in a good spot.
Yeah, well, it's like if the Patriots make the playoffs, you would say no to playoff Lenny.
I think you have to wait till week 17 to sign Lenny.
Yeah,
I don't think you can do it before the season starts. You have to wait.
you hold some stock. You're just like, dude, we're gonna make the playoffs. I promise you.
You slide them a couple bucks under
We're
the
gonna win
table.
9 games. Somehow
We're gonna be
the 7th spot.
we're gonna be the last wild card team. You take a couple bucks under the table. You sit out. You wait, and we'll bring you in then.
Yeah, we'll give you $2 million. We'll promise we'll use you at some point during the regular season, but we're really saving you for January.
Yeah, you're gonna get 4 carries until January.
Yeah.
Some team's gonna do that. Some team, some point in the season, some team's gonna see playoff Lenny sitting there and go, "Well, we just had an injury."
It'll be like week 11. They're like, man, we're in that 5 spot. We could really use an extra running back. Like our starting running back's a little dinged up. He's getting questionable for week 12. We can use Leonard Fournette right now. He's fresh. He's fresh off the bill.
Yeah, someone will talk to him as long as he doesn't come in overweight. It'll be okay.
Yeah.
If he comes in overweight, then you just created another problem for yourself.
Hey, we'll work him in the game shape final 6-7 weeks of the season. We'll figure it out. We'll have him run some gases in practice.
That's funny. Shout out Leonard Fournette, man. Shout out to him. Moving away from football a little bit, the James Harden saga has continued, and this has gotten to a very interesting point. And I really want to hear your thoughts on this because you did 2 posts about it as well on the James Harden side and the Daryl Morey side. And basically, this all stems back from last offseason. James Harden took less money last offseason in the hopes of getting an extension this offseason. Did not get said extension, asked for a trade, did not get said trade. And he also opted into his player option. He didn't become a free agent, which is an interesting wrinkle in all this. But very confusing right now for James Harden. What do you make of, I guess a mess is a good way to call it. What do you make of this whole James Harden mess?
Yeah, it's a mess. I mean, when I first saw it, like this was like news that I woke up to, and I'm just like, what? It's weird now with Twitter or what they call X, out of whatever the kids call it nowadays. But when the first thing I saw was Shams' tweet, and I was like, because with now you can buy the blue check mark, and like there's people who have like they have the fake ats, and so it makes it look real, but it's not. But I had to like quadruple check if that was Shams' real account, and I was just like, what in the F? Just like what's going on? Like just out of nowhere. I mean, it's not super surprising because, as you mentioned, he would sign for 2 years, about $69 million last offseason. It freed up cap space for them, or not cap space, but it freed up space for them to bring in PJ Tucker on the full mid level, which he wouldn't be getting elsewhere most likely. They brought in Daniel House on the biannual. They traded for DeAnthony Melton, and so it helped him free up space for that. And so maybe there was something like behind the doors of like, I'll sign this with the player option, but I'm going to get max money or close to max money next offseason. That didn't end up happening. And then, of course, as you mentioned, also the fact that when he opted into the player option, he opted in because he wanted the trade to the Clippers. If he opted out, teams with cap space like the Spurs or like the Rockets would have been. I mean, there was rumors about him going to Houston, but I don't think there were subsequent rumors. I don't know how true this all is after the fact that Ime Udoka didn't want James Harden, which it's fair. I get it. Especially knowing Ime Udoka's personality as a head coach, him being the stubborn guy, him being the no nonsense asshole in the room, but for a good reason. And so I mean, it's not what happened. It's not really surprising to me. I mean, again, he wants to trade to only the Clippers. That's the only team on his trade request list, whatever you want to call it. But then if you're the Clippers, you're just like, all right, why would I give up anything of value? He has 1 year left on his deal. He can't sign an extension because he signed a 2-year deal, and so it's like, what? Like, why would I give up like Terrence Mann, or why would I give up again someone of value? Like, if anything, you're getting no disrespect to these players, but you're getting like a Markieff Morris, Robert Covington, some sort of combination around that realm for James Harden, because again, we could trade for him and he could just dip. Like he'd just be like, nah, man, like I want to go somewhere else. Cause I mean, it's hard to predict James Harden, but he has requested 3 trades in like 3 or 4 years. And so he could just leave after that if he wants to. And so that's also something like if you're the Clippers, you're just like, all right, like why would I trade anything like of value? Like the Sixers don't have leverage because again, Harden requested one team, and so that automatically that gets rid of the leverage that if any leverage that the Sixers thought they may have had, and we can't sign him anything. And so like why exactly? Like when he was in Houston, he was in the first year of $170 million deal over 4 years when he requested his first trade. He could purposely dog it if he wants to, and that's what he did for the first 10 or so games, however many games that he played. When he was in Brooklyn, when he hinted at wanting out again, he had 3 more years or like 2-3 more years left on his deal. Now he has 1 more year left on his deal, and Harden's kind of in a no-win spot because it's like, if I hold out, well, there with new stipulations in the CBA, if I hold out for 30 more days, then I can't sign with another team in the offseason unless the Sixers are like less of they consent. And so I don't know how much to buy that he's not reporting to training camp, or he's not planning on reporting to training camp. And so I don't blame Morey for like not trading him away for nothing, because I mean Daryl Morey's been uncomfortable. He's been in uncomfortable situations before with like the whole Ben Simmons situation, and so it's like I don't know to make all this. I don't know what happens next. If I'm giving you just like the shortest answer possible, but it is just a complete mess. I mean, what does this mean? I mean, I think the biggest question in all this is what does this mean for Joel? He's played 7 healthy seasons there. He got drafted, I think, in 2014. He spent his entire career there. He lived through the whole Ben Simmons situation. They traded his guy, or at least signed and traded his guy, one of his close pals, and Jimmy Butler, to my beloved Heat in free agency. After Jimmy behind the scenes was like, nah, like Ben Simmons, this guy ain't it. And like now he's going to go through another situation in Philly with James Harden, the guy who he wanted before. I mean, in lieu of the Ben Simmons situation, it was supposed to be like the next duo or whatever, like whatever you want to call it. Like, what does it mean for Joel, who is now entering the first year of a 4-year extension for $200+ million? Like, what is he going to request a trade anytime soon? I wouldn't be surprised. I think that's the biggest question in all this. I guess that's my biggest takeaway is like, is Joel really going to do this shit again?
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to trade James Harden for 15 cents on the dollar and Joel's just going to be fine with it? I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
Or is Joel going to put up with Harden bullshitting for the first 15, 20 games of the regular season if he does come back and play? I don't think so. So what does this mean for that? Like, this organization's in a mess.
Mm-hmm.
And they've had bad off seasons before. I can't remember who like tweeted about it, but there was like someone tweeted like a list of just all the bad shit they've done from 2014 to now in terms of like what's happened in their off season. It's just been a disaster. So again, I really don't know what happens next, because it's like I didn't expect him to be traded. I think I can't remember who I was saying. Maybe it was with Jackson. And I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if he returns to Philly, because I don't think there's a market for him. And obviously, Daryl over the weekend thought the same thing, and James Harden is now calling him a liar of all things. Wow. I think if you want to call him a liar or not, but I think Daryl's just trying to do his job. But
yeah,
and both sides could have handled this probably better.
Yep. And you know, it was always going to be tough to get Harden out of Philly, because when you just look at it, at the most surface level, how often do you see someone like James Harden, who's a well-known commodity, someone of his stature, get traded from contender to contender? It's not like Philly is still trying to win a championship, and the Clippers are still trying to win a championship. And it just is not easy for those two teams with the same goal to go out there and try and make a trade. We're seeing Miami and Portland struggle to make a trade for Damian Lillard. Well, that's a rebuilding team and a contender that are struggling to come up with a deal. And now we're going to expect contender to contender. Like you said, why would you want to give up Terrence Mann in return get James Harden? It's like that doesn't really help you that much. And it doesn't put you in a good position long term. And the Clippers at this offseason, I don't know how much smoke was, actual smoke. I don't know how much of this was true, but there were rumors that they were interested in getting off Paul George and or Kawhi Leonard. And we're having that come at the same time of you adding James Harden when there's at least speculation that you may move off one of your two aging superstars already. It's like, and now we're going to expect them to go out there and add a third to the mix. It just doesn't seem, like it doesn't seem that plausible. It doesn't, like, you get your calculator out, you start doing the math, and the math just doesn't add up. It's like, I don't know what I don't know what Harden was expecting. I imagine that Daryl Morey was not expecting there to be much on the trade market. I can't imagine he was necessarily shocked. And like you said, James Harden opts in so he can get traded because with the cap situation around the league, it makes it virtually impossible for him to go to a contender on a reasonable salary. And, so it would have been real tough for him to opt out of that. But it's like it was going to be tough either way. It's like now we find ourselves in the situation of, does James Harden play for the Sixers this year? James Harden, I don't know how old he is off the top of my head, but let's not pretend like he's in his prime and he's got years to give away. So it's like you're going to let, 1 year of your career just go on the wayside because you don't want to play for a team that's managed by Daryl Morey. It's like that seems a little like, I get it. You don't like the guy, but stick through it and try and hit the market next year. And that might not even be I'm trying to work out a situation in my head, but that might not work out either because who says the free agent market's that good next year? It's like he may do all this to become a free agent next year and just have, 30 teams go, I don't know, man. We're not really interested. It's like that's a realistic possibility. Obviously, someone would bring him in, but certainly not on max money or certainly not on an expensive deal.
Like he's still, I think there's a little bit of a misconception out there just in the public realm, like of James Harden being some like shit player. Like he's still a solid player. I mean, he does have a bunch of playoff shortcomings. He's still not a great defensive player, but in terms of like what he adds as like a playmaker, I think can't be ignored. I think there are definitely times where like maybe he's not your primary scorer or even like secondary scorer, but he can help distribute a ball and lead an offense. So he's not like some crap dog shit player, but like the extension that he would have been able to sign in Philly would have been like 4 for north of 200 mil. Would you sign him to that? I don't know if I would. And so it's like, that's where it's like, I don't necessarily blame Morey for this, if I'm being completely honest. But I mean, if I'm kind of relating this to the Dame Lillard situation, it would be very funny if like Dame is just like, oh, if this is how I get my way. I mean, he's not going to do it, but like just call Joe Cronin out, call him a liar and stuff. But like, I guess James really wants out. And so this is just how he's going to do it. And that's just how you create a disaster. Or you just create mayhem. And I don't know who's going to blink first again. Like when you said, I don't know what James was expecting. He was expecting either an extension or he was expecting a trade, neither of which he got. And now he's just kind of like, all right, like, what do I do now? I mean, he's probably going to report to training camp. I'm calling that a little bit of a bluff because, again, if he doesn't report or if he holds out for a certain amount of time, he can't sign anywhere next offseason without consent, which is a crazy rule. But I get it from an owner's / front office perspective of trying to limit player empowerment because, as we all know, player empowerment in the NBA today is effing crazy, for better or worse. I mean, I'm usually pro player, but even then, there's just like there's always people out there who are like, all right, like what if you actually did this at your own day job? Like, well, like how would your boss look? Your boss would look at you with five eyes if that were the case. But as I've mentioned before, this isn't the NBA is a little bit different when it comes to if you're comparing that to a normal job, then we're a little bit out of line here. But it's still crazy how player empowerment has taken over today's game. And again, I'm not saying I have a problem with it because I don't. But if we're just calling spade a spade, player empowerment's insane. So like if you are a front office member or a general manager like Daryl Morey, you're just like, okay, hold out, do it. You won't. Like, you can't sign anywhere next offseason without our consent if you hold out for 31 days or 32, like however long you want to hold out. So yeah, go ahead. Don't report to training camp. Like, let's see what happens. Like, that's almost kind of what Daryl Morey's probably thinking in his head right now, because again, he's been uncomfortable in situations. Like, he's fine with being in uncomfortable situations. Like, Ben Simmons had 4 years left, 100+ million on his deal with no trade value. He wasn't playing, and he somehow got James Harden for him because that's the guy that he ultimately wanted in the end, who he had a working relationship with. Now, I don't know what Daryl Morey wants for James Harden. I mean, obviously, you want something of value, but who knows how this ultimately plays out? But it's just a crazy, insane situation that could be a slippery slope if Joel gets pissed off. I mean, they just hired Nick Nurse. I don't know what Nick is thinking, but he's probably knowing Nick Nurse, he's probably coming up with like 8 different ways to beat an offense right now. He's trying to create. He had the box in one. He's probably trying to create some new defense right now. So he's probably in his own scientific lab doing something else. But regardless, I just wonder how this affects everyone else, not just Harden and Morey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and kind of off the back of that, do you see a path where the 76ers can like win a championship in the next couple of years? Because if the answer to that is no, then do you think Joel Embiid is sticking around going, well, I know we can't win a championship. We don't have the, capabilities. We don't have the roster. But I'm sticking around because, like you said, this ultimately could lead to a Joel Embiid trade. And I don't know about you, but personally, I just do not see it from where the 76ers currently sit, especially outside of Embiid and Maxey.
No, I don't see this team winning a title. I mean, for the thing that bugs me, I mean, obviously being a fan of an Eastern Conference team, what's bugged me for a little while is like we've lumped Philly into the Boston, Milwaukee category, or at least the public has. And
that's
like
fair. That's very fair.
I just don't think they're there. I think they're a notch below. I think there's 2 teams in the East. You could argue 3. And I think if you're going to argue 3, I'd probably say Miami, even though the talent is worse because they've gone to the finals 2 of the last 4 years. They have the most playoff wins since Jimmy Butler arrived in the entire league. Like, this team is 5-2 against Boston, Philly, and Milwaukee in the playoffs over the last 4 years. So, like, if you're going to lump a third team into there, I'd probably lump Miami, even though that's a little bit of a biased take. I get it. I got it. I know there's a flag behind me. But I still think, like, if you're thinking of just 2 teams in the East, just from a talent perspective, I would probably just have Boston and Milwaukee. Not to say, like, Joel Embiid is a terrific player. He's entering his age 29, age 30 season. He's coming off an MVP. He's led the league in scoring to the last 4 years. But, like, from an ultimate talent perspective, even with Maxey, I still think they're like a notch below. And then if you're just going to say like a contender race, I think Philly's just a notch below both Boston and Milwaukee. Because again, they're a perennial second round exit. Like, how can I say a team is a contender every year when they're a perennial second round exit? It just, I mean, that seems a little unfair to them, but like if I'm being completely honest, I just don't see them winning a title. And I don't think, again, maybe they make a conference finals. Maybe. I mean, if they get a good draw, if injuries happen. I mean, injuries happen every year. It's not, the NBA just isn't a tournament. It's how healthy you are. in the end, and that ultimately helps. I mean, you could go back years and years and years. There's a track record of teams who make it or win the finals that they have injury luck on their side. That's just something that ultimately happens, and obviously you wish everyone was healthy, but that's just not the case. And so like maybe that happens to them at some point, but I just don't see it.
Yep.
I just
And
don't see it. Even making a title, I just don't see it. But hey,
yeah,
prove me
and
wrong, I guess.
when you compare them to the other teams in the East and West, it's like Nuggets won last year, and everyone likes to compare who's better, Embiid, Jokic, whatever your answer is. I don't care. I think a lot more people have swung over to the Jokic side after they've won the chip. Fair, 100% reasonable. But it's like look at the structure of that roster compared to the structure of the 76ers. Like outside of the stars, the structure of Boston, the structure of Milwaukee, it's like once you get past the stars, those teams are so much they're just better built. And right now the 76ers don't have the assets, the flexibility to build out the rest of that roster. I don't think so.
Outside of Maxey, no.
Yeah. And until they can do that, it's like that's not gonna happen. And I'm 100% with you that they're probably not a championship caliber team. And then that Joel Embiid, you're kind of on a ticking clock for him to request that trade. If you can't, maybe you can con with staying in if you can get to the finals, the conference finals, the finals, whatever it is. Maybe you can convince him to stay. But if you can't make it past the second round, he's going to start having some second thoughts.
I mean, he's already had that. I think it was that one quote. I'm paraphrasing. He's like, I don't care if I win a championship here, like somewhere else, or like whatever it is. And it's just like, I don't think he just said that to say that. I think that's a little bit calculated.
Yeah.
Like, they're walking on thin string.
Yep.
And when that sucker breaks,
hopefully the market's high. Hopefully teams are sitting on draft picks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
or some sort of asset. Because again, Daryl Morey's a GM, kind of like Masai, kind of like a few other GMs across the league. They don't kind of like Danny Ainge. They don't want to lose a trade.
Mm-hmm.
They want to they're not going to sell shit for 40 cents on the dollar because that's just the value. Like, no, they're going to try to extract everything that you got, and they're going to try to win that sucker in the end.
Yep.
That's just how some GMs are. And it's like, I get that's kind of your job, but that's the goal. But it just depends. I mean, again, Joel Embiid, his value probably in the trade market hasn't been higher because he's just coming off an MVP season. But he is entering the first year of a 4-year extension. So let's see how this plays out. Let's see. Within this next 6 months or the next year, I wouldn't be surprised if he was just like, nah, guys, I'm good. I'm out. I mean, that's just how the NBA works. I mean, there's a superstar that's unhappy every 6 months.
Yep. So someone's got to be the superstar next offseason. And
yeah,
it'll be interesting to watch. That is for sure. And then kind of switching over, keeping it big man related, we had Stephen A. Smith recently went on I believe it was on the Paul George podcast, and they were talking about DeMarcus Cousins. And I like DeMarcus Cousins, and so does Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. Smith likes him a lot and said DeMarcus Cousins could be a top 5 big man in the league right now. Now, I disagree. What are your thoughts here?
The last time we saw DeMarcus Cousins, he was like backing up Nikola. I mean, he backed up Nikola Jokic. He's okay. He was okay. You backing up Brook Lopez in Milwaukee a little bit. He's okay. That was like nearly 3 years ago, or like 2 or 3 years ago, and he hasn't played in the league since. Like, who is he better than? I'll read you a list of bigs. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we're talking about a top 5 big man, he obviously is not better than Jokic or Embiid. He's not better than Anthony Davis. And I can tell you for sure shit, since I watch him every game, he's not better than Bam Adebayo. He's not better than Rudy Gobert. He's not better than DeAndre Ayton. He's not better than Jared Allen. He's not better than Domantas Sabonis. He's not better than Clint Capella. He's not better than Jonas Valanciunas. He's not better than Robert Williams. He's not better than Nikola Vucevic. He's not better than Yusuf Nurkic, even when he isn't healthy. He's not better than Steven Adams. He's not better than Jakob Poeltl. He's not better than Miles Turner. He's not better than Wendell Carter. Who is he better than? Like, if we're talking about starting big men in today's NBA, who is he better than? He's not better than Alfred Şengün. He's not better than Brook Lopez. He's not better than Ivica Zubac. He's not better than Precious Achiuwa. Or actually, he might be better than Precious Achiuwa now that I just thought of Precious because he was a former Heatle. But, like, who is he better than? He's not better than Mitchell Robinson. He's not better than Isaiah Stewart. Who is he better than?
He's not top 30.
No disrespect to DeMarcus Cousins, but like obviously prime DeMarcus Cousins in like 2013, 2014, 2015. Yes, he would be better than them. And when DeMarcus Cousins had his quote a while back of him being like a top 3 guy in the league or like a top 3 center in the league, I don't remember what exact phrase he used. I respect that because it's like, you're not going to hear NBA players most often be like, nah, man, I'm like the 32nd best guy in the league. Like, no, they're not going to think like that. That's just not how they're wired. It's like that. I don't think a lot of us understand that when it comes to like, these guys are professional athletes for a reason and they have the confidence for a reason. But like, if we're being objective here as like outsiders, because we have opinions too. He's not better than the majority of these guys that I just named. He's not better than Nick Claxton.
Nope.
Right?
It's if you were to take the last 5 years of my memory and just zap it, make it disappear, then I'd tell you he's a top 5 big man in the league. But until that happens, yeah, to be honest, it's like, and the thing that surprised me the most was that he said it so matter of factly.
Yeah.
like it wasn't a discussion.
You could say he could still play he could still be like a role player and he could be 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th guy. I might disagree with that to some extent. It also depends on the situation that he's in because again, he hasn't played since the 21-22 season. And so he took a year off, at least from an NBA, like playing in the NBA. So like if you could say that, you don't have to go out and say that he's a top 5 big man. Like Paul George was saying, like, yeah, he can play. Like, yeah, he can play.
He can, and it's like he could probably
top 5 big though. Like, let's be real here.
He could do like what DeAndre Jordan did last year for the Nuggets, probably. Like, and just sit on, that's fine, but that's not the claim. I can't believe Paul George is so willing just to be like, yeah, man, he can play.
Yeah, right. Again, it's also like there's also, I have that reaction. Like, I can't believe that either. But if I'm playing devil's advocate here, like I think guys in the league respect guys in the league more than we do. Mm-hmm. Like I've said this before, like, yeah, people don't like Russell Westbrook. Like people like Lakers fans. Trey. There's guys who just don't like Russell Westbrook. But like, if you hear about how people talk about Russell Westbrook in the league, they love him. Like they love him as a teammate. They love him as a player. Like there's a lot of guys who respect Russ. And it's like, I think some portion of it is like they came up when Russ was like coming up and they like with Cousins, Paul George was still like, he was coming up and becoming a star when DeMarcus Cousins was also a star. And so, like, I think there's some merit to that. Mm-hmm. Like, guys who come up around the same time as you, or like guys who just come up in general, like you have a little bit of more respect for them than like me, some schmo Joe, like how I feel about them. Like, I think they weight that a lot. And like, it's also like with, again, rest in peace, but like, it's how also like older players and older like fans talk about Kobe Bryant. Mm-hmm. Like, I think some fans still don't think they it's not like they don't respect Kobe, but like they don't think they think he might be a little bit overrated. But like if you hear players in the league talk about Kobe, they're like, yeah, he was a motherfucker.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was just that guy. Like he was they top five, like top five, top 10, like whatever list you want to have him on. Like they're like, yeah, no, he's a motherfucker. Like he's, excuse my language, but like he's that guy. And so I think there is merit to like players in the league having more respect for players in the league,
Yeah.
or at least certain players in the league, especially guys who are stars more than we do. As just like general basketball fan. I mean, I wouldn't consider myself a general basketball fan, but like amongst the general public, I think there's certain like weight to that. But like I'm with you. Like I just like I don't. I mean, obviously, if I'm in Paul George's shoes, I would push back on that. But again,
Yeah.
I'm not Paul George. I'm
Yeah.
Matt Hanifin. I'm a washed up high school basketball player who hasn't played high school basketball. Like that's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
So like my opinion may not. I mean, again, there might be a certain amount of respect for DeMarcus Cousins that I might not have, at least at this stage of DeMarcus Cousins' professional basketball career, that other guys might have, even if they still are playing the league, or again, or like acclaimed voices like Stephen A. Smith.
Yeah. And it's like to that point, DeMarcus Cousins averaged like I don't know his career high off the top of my head, but he was averaging over 20 for several consecutive seasons, going over 25 per game. And like, to your point, there's a level of respect that you're going to get from other players when you're averaging like 27.
Yeah.
If you go out there and average 27 as a big man too, after 2000, if you're averaging 27, that's like you're in rare company. It's like there aren't a bunch of big men walking around who averaged 27, who are the best player on their team, and they were trying to build a championship team around. That is rare, and that, to your point, that's going to garner you respect among your peers because it's just not a common thing. And also, to Stephen A's point, I did kind of like what he said about his skill set. It's like the skill set that he has would have been very good in today's NBA. I think like
Agreed.
he would have been great in his prime right now. Like if he was in his prime right now, he probably would have been a top 5 big man. It's like, but he's not in his prime. Is the problem, and it's like that's where it really got off the rails. Was you're not talking about the same DeMarcus Cousins that we're talking about sitting here. It's like we're talking about 2023 DeMarcus Cousins. That they're not, and that's to your point about Paul George, I get why he wouldn't, because that's a good point, because he's not going to go out there and disrespect DeMarcus Cousins when DeMarcus Cousins probably had a few good games against him. It's like, what I mean? It makes it hard to go out there and disrespect that guy. And I'm sure DeMarcus Cousins would give Paul George that same respect, in 5 years if Paul George isn't playing as well as he's playing, right now. So I think that's a great point about player-to-player respect that I probably didn't think about, and I imagine most people don't really think about that inner aspect of the game.
I mean, there's guys who have like beef with certain players, and so it's not like everyone likes everyone, but like I think when you are a star at a certain point in your career, like at least if you're a player who's maybe in that same category of like you're like, I mean, I know Paul George and DeMarcus are like, I don't want to say they're close, but like I know they're friends. And so like, yeah, you're not going to sit up there and like disrespect him and be like, no, maybe I don't think so. Like, I mean, I just don't think that would be the case. But again, I don't know DeMarcus Cousins. I like DeMarcus Cousins as a player. I loved him in Sacramento. Like he was one of the best centers in the league, and I wholeheartedly agree that I think his skill set in today's NBA would definitely benefit. I mean, unfortunately, he suffered a few knee injuries, and he lost some juice there, especially for a guy of his size. It's unfortunate what happened to him, like as he was really in the prime of his career, and even like I think the tail off, and I think the decline was much quicker than obviously he would have liked to, and that most of us would have liked, and most of us anticipated. But that's just the fact of the reality of the situation, that like I don't think Like even though he hasn't played in the season, he's not a top 5 big. Like he's just not. A couple other guys like Walker, he's not better than Walker Kessler. Like he's not better than like Bobby Portis. Like he's just not. Like there's guys that, I mean, if I'm again, I don't want, again, I'm not trying to disrespect DeMarcus Cousins, but like at this stage of his basketball career, he's not better than those guys. I think he might be able to help an NBA team for at least as like a backup big, maybe a third string big. He's a good veteran presence. I mean, I think he would be good for the young guys who are coming up. But I'm just not with Stephen A on saying that he's a top 5 big. And at the same time, Stephen A has garnered that respect just amongst everyone about like, so like whatever like he says, I mean, people aren't gonna like, I mean, people are gonna bash him, but like he's not gonna get in any trouble or anything like that. Like I don't think anyone, at least the diehard Stephen A fans, aren't gonna like lose respect from him. They're gonna be like, oh yeah, I agree. Like he's garnered enough respect to say that, I think, at this point in his sports media career. But it's not something I'm gonna agree with.
Yeah, exactly. He can say whatever he wants, but there's going to be a lot of people who disagree. And it's like, and it's not just DeMarcus Cousins, right? Not to make it sound like we're bashing on DeMarcus Cousins, but if he would have said that about Dwight Howard, who's doing his thing overseas,
Exactly.
it's like the same response would have happened. So it's just,
DeAndre Jordan.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. It's like at some point you just get past your prime. And like you said, DeMarcus Cousins had injuries. Didn't he? Did he have an Achilles too, or am I making that up? I might be making
think
that
so.
up.
I think so. He also had an ACL, I believe.
If you ACL's bad, Achilles really bad. If you're getting an Achilles and an ACL, it's like that's about enough to, patch up a career. That's not easy stuff to come back from. It's just as unfortunate as it is. So he's one of those guys who was on the wrong side of the injury bug, and it's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah.
And we're sitting at an hour, and I don't know if you can hear, but my dog decided to bark.
I can hear it a little bit.
Yeah, off mic. Not too loud, so that's good at least. But we're sitting at an hour. We touched on the big NFL signings. We touched on the big James Harden debacle. We touched on Stephen A saying some crazy things in the media. So we got all our bases covered today. It was a good time on the Daily Show. Daily Show will be back tomorrow with 2 new people. I assume it won't be either of us. So I'll say 2 new people, not new, obviously. 2 other Vendetta members sitting in on the Daily Show. So make sure you tune into that. Subscribe to Vendetta Sports Media, and thank you for watching.